Zoom. It says it's happening. And is it happening? Let's see.
It says on our end that it is streaming on Facebook.
Okay, that's good. Let's see if it shows up just on our Facebook, our normal Facebook. Yes, it does. It's just one of those technology things. So everybody, we are here, and I'm just doing a few little cutting and pastings. And here's some music to listen to while I'm doing that.
I have that on.
The club.
Yeah.
Yeah. How nice. Wow, great band and great song too. Is that your song, Darius?
No, that's Abdullah Ibrahim's tune. It's called Sakwe. Also, its English title is Royal Blue.
Really
But
nice.
thanks for the compliment. And the great band is the one I still have, and we're about to do more gigs, and we've been together since what, Cathy?
Well, for 16 years.
Yeah. Yeah. The drummer's South African. His name is Wesley Gibbons, and the bass player and sax player are British. Matt Ridley on bass, and Dave O'Higgins, who's had a long career, young as he appears to be, because he started basically as a teenager with Cleo Lane
Oh,
and Johnny Dankworth, and he's just been a
wow.
real asset to work with him, and because we live in England, and he's such a big deal on the British jazz scene, and we all get along together very well.
It's a great band. Sounds great. Yeah, that was really nice.
That was in Moscow, by the way, which seemed to be was a different world to right now, I'm afraid. Yeah.
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 That was just a few years ago, right? 4 years.
2019. Yeah.
Yeah. You already have a few comments here. Do I dare? Oh, this looks like spam. I'm not going to read that because it looks like spam because there's a mention of money in it. But a friend of mine, a guitarist who goes to UNT, he said he's not sure. His name is Taylor Hatch. He's not sure if Darius recalls being there in 2009 with your brothers and your dad, but he heard the concert with the 1 o'clock band. It was amazing.
I think that was just my brothers and not me. This happens a lot.
Oh,
My brother Chris plays trombone and bass when we play together as a group, and he's a big composer. And I think well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what happened in 2009, but I'm sure I'd remember if I played in North Texas with the big band. That would have been such a thrill and an honor. So compensate for having seemed to have forgotten something. I didn't forget it. I wasn't really there. I will say it would have been great to have been there.
Yeah. Well, you guys, you're on the East Coast of the States right now. You live in London now, but
Not
you,
London, Cathy, in south of London,
oh, okay.
in a town called Rye in
Oh, okay.
East Sussex.
Okay.
It's near Hastings, which of course is famous for the battle, and it's all in that 1066 country, where the
Yeah.
Normans first arrived in England. Yeah.
Yeah, well, my husband goes metal detecting over there.
Oh, wow.
A
And also,
detector.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah. And I've spent a lot of time in Brighton. I had some
well,
music.
it's not far from Brighton.
Yeah. And Kathy, it sounds like you're from England, yeah?
No, I'm from South Africa.
Oh, I always confuse the accent.
Yes, well, English people can recognize that it's a South African accent straight away, but other people always think maybe it's English.
Yeah. So did you guys meet in South Africa?
No,
No.
we met in New York.
Oh. I
Um,
see.
I was working for the Duke Ellington Orchestra,
Oh.
and we wanted to put on a major show called Ellington is Forever. This was with Duke's son Mercer. And Mercer said we should get Dave Brubeck. This was in 1976.
Oh.
And Dave Brubeck arrived with his sons, and that's how Darius and I met. Darius always says I employed him. So
That's great. Did I read that you're a musician or a singer, Cathy?
no, but I've just been involved with music for enormous part of my life. I did learn to play the piano, but I pretty soon realized I wasn't going to be anything special, so I didn't carry on. Yeah.
That's kind of like this instrument for me. I went to college for it, but I can barely play it now.
Oh.
Well, Darius, it's gosh, I don't even know where to start, but I'll start. I like to be in the moment, so I'll be here now. But I think for a lot of people, the concept of growing up in such a dramatic, what appears to be a dramatic family in music and jazz is a bit overwhelming and wonderfully overwhelming. I would actually like to know about that first. Like, um, how does it feel? I can only imagine certain things, but I'd like to hear it from your own mouth. How does it feel to be part of your family? And do you give it much thought in this period of time, or did you at some point in time?
Always.
Okay.
At every point. And it's interesting. Well, you say be here now, I've done a lot of interviews. You can imagine that I have, and a lot of them go to that point. And then we end up talking about childhood, and because childhood anecdotes it kind of hovers around, pre-teenhood.
Yeah.
But coming at it from the other end, I just turned 76 this week. I think
Oh,
about it
happy
more.
birthday.
Thank you. Now that my parents are gone, the legacy is very much an important thing for me and for my brothers. And we're trying to keep it alive in various levels. Musically, of course, we play some Dave Brubeck music, although Chris and I are both composers and have a lot of original music that we also perform. There's the Brubeck collection at the Wilton Library in Wilton, Connecticut, which, even if you're not a Brubeck focused scholar, is an amazing resource because of the fame that he achieved. So there was continuous coverage, and it relates to almost everything that happened from World War II and up and into the 21st century.
Yeah.
So it's a way of seeing a lot about mid-century American life and later, and and of course he played at every White House except the Bushes.
Ah.
And I'm happy to say, this sounds bittersweet, that both parents died before 2016, so that meant that they didn't live to see the Trump White House and the bitter, racist, anti-immigrant, anti-everything polarization that took place since.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we've been involved with lifelong, has what was called civil rights and is now human rights has broadened out. And so, I grew up, and I'm staying in the moment in the sense that I'm realizing more and more retrospectively how those engagements, those values, that network of people, the sort of people that were around my parents in their generation and the younger people that I grew up with, that so shaped our values, our choices in life, from very personal choices like choice of life partner to big career choices and so on. So that was, you're getting this answer rather than I thought Joe and Paul and Eugene were my uncles, which was, kind of a standard anecdote.
Eugene was kind of my uncle too. When I came to LA, I did a gig with him for several weeks, and he was great. He gave me some great lessons.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was, again, it's sort of retrospective. Sometimes it was very hard to follow his words, but he was a presence.
Yeah.
He changed situations, and ultimately I think changed lives just by being there. It's kind of a mysterious thing, but I share that with you, that feeling.
I'm just going to tell people. So we're talking about Senator Eugene Wright. I'm writing that down. Senator Eugene Wright, who was a bass player with Dave Brubeck for a long time, and
Well,
of course the classic Take 5 recording he was on, and and he lived in LA for a long time. And he was a big man and he was one of those guys who watched and knew exactly what he thought, and then would say, like, as you said, like maybe one comment or something that would go pow. Yeah.
maybe your listeners should know that he wasn't a real senator. That was kind of his nickname. And yeah.
It was kind of the authority that he carried.
Right.
Right. That's funny. Let's see. Well, yeah. And I think I'd like to go on to the book, or let's see, maybe first, I would like to know about your history in South Africa, because that led to your book. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Well, we went to South Africa in 1983. We actually signed a 2-year contract because things were very difficult in South Africa. It was still the apartheid era, and there was also the question of cultural boycott. Should we go? But we checked with the African National Congress, which was the main liberation movement, who are now in government, at the time operating outside of South Africa. And they gave us their blessing, actually, because they felt the time had come to start changing institutions from the inside. And jazz had always been very important, actually, as a music in South Africa and as part of the freedom struggle. Jazz was the music that spoke to people about,
Freedom.
freedom, exactly. Yeah. So they were all in favor of that. But nevertheless, we just, I say we is because although Darius was the official lecturer being employed by the university, I knew that I was going to have a role in trying to find students because we're going into a situation where there are no jazz students, no programs. In fact, it was the first jazz degree program in the whole of Africa, not in South Africa. Yeah. So it was a very much a pioneering effort. And so my role was finding students, fundraising for most of the students who had no money whatsoever, and then persuading the university to disregard certain qualification standards, because we knew our students, not the ones we were likely to get, didn't have a good education. While they might be brilliant players, they couldn't read music. So Darius had to kind of fight his way around City Hall, which in this case was the university, to kind of get them to admit students on a non-degree basis at first, and then hope that they would transfer into the real program.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot. That's pretty deep.
Mhm.
Yeah. So
Well,
did you actually actually teach people to read music as well? Like, was it kind of that inclusive?
it was more sort of, not that often. What we set up was that there are correspondence courses put out of various kinds. There were people who wanted to help us. We created kind of bridging situations. But for it to be worth anything, the students had to be admitted.
Yeah.
So it was more like I was constantly, as jazz musicians do, I was constantly improvising ways of including students that were, to me, it was pretty obvious what had to be done. But again, everything was unprecedented.
Yeah.
And I think, looking back, I think that made it easier rather than harder. Because I could just make up things when I was talking to administration, say, oh, well, in America, anyone who wants to comes to a class. That, because that's kind of how I had to do it.
See, that is a significant part of the book, how we got the students in and what we had to do to pretend they were real students. And
the distinction between real students are those that would be registered for a degree, and then we kind of created a diploma which was less dependent on essay writing and doing assignments, and that required a high standard of English. And gradually we had a program that reached all the way from the level of literally teaching people to read to postgraduate, to people with PhDs and stuff. But it didn't, it wasn't like you just came in with a list of demands. At every stage, we had to prove the validity and viability of a program like that so that it could be funded. Wow. So students could be funded to get to Cathy's kind of core concern throughout her time of being there.
But it's also where it's important beyond the university is that it was kind of, we were in a way ahead of the transformation curve, because the university was mainly white. There were very, very few Black students, and they were all either in the medical school, which was a kind of preserve of, was reserved for Black students, and certain other components. But so there was the whole race thing to get through as well. And many of the most, I suppose, of the jazz students were Black, the ones certainly that didn't have the right qualifications were Black, but many of them are now really well-known musicians with quite international reputations.
Yeah. And I think this is such an obvious point, it's easy to miss. When we refer to race, that's from under South African conditions, racial classification wasn't just a matter of prejudice. I mean, it was something beyond that. It was seriously, people were classified as Black, white, Indian, or colored, meaning people of mixed race. And were administratively, legislatively prescribed certain roles.
Interesting.
It's not quite the same thing of talking about racial tensions and antagonism and discrimination the way we experience in the West. And another layer of it is that race just maps onto culture, to the extent that most of the students I taught, for them, English was a second language, not a first language. Their first language would be typically Zulu, or then there were some other languages, but where we were in Natal was primarily Zulu culture. But there are 11 official languages in South Africa. And so you really had to deal with things in a way that was just compensating for issues that people had. And I used to ask myself when I was giving a lecture, would I understand this if I heard this lecture in French, which is a language I learned in school? Educationally, the challenge is to bridge differences in culture, and that maps onto race. Then there's all the kind of politics that come with that. So a lot of that is in the book too.
Well, I'll show
Very interesting.
This is the South African version of the book.
Uh-huh.
And there you'll see that's the big band. And the first time we all got on a bus to go up to Johannesburg to play some.
There's Cathy.
Oh, well, that's less important than showing just all the mixed band that we had.
Yes.
Was quite a revelation at that time. Yeah.
Yes, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well,
And
that just to go back a little bit to what Darius was saying, I really understand that for a few different reasons. I mean, Japan it has been kind of a second home for me because I've traveled there a lot. And it really has hit me over the years, the cultural, well, basically what you're saying, I really get that it's a real, let's see how to say it. It's a, it's built from the bottom up into the culture. And so here we are today, or whenever you were doing it, and you have to deal with it because that's what it is. It's actually part of the culture. I understand that. Even I've gone to England and spoken to service people in English, and we have not understood each other. And it's not because we're using different words. It's concepts, it's which is kind of mind blowing. But but wow, that is just extremely I just want to say deep or challenging or, very, very real. And while you're going through it, both of you, I'm sure, just had I'm sure you were frustrated a lot, anguished over things. Uh, Also, big wins, probably, like when you did win.
Big
Fantastic.
wins. And the the thing that made it all work is just what a wonderful force for good jazz itself is. I mean, it sounds like a cliche you've heard before, and so many times it becomes meaningless unless you've been in an experience where really that is your currency, that is your trump card, that is what gets across, is the music and the joy of playing together. And despite the differences in background, the people who were interested in taking the jazz course were very literate in the sense of knowing what was on an album. You know, if you talk to a bunch of American kids, I don't think they would perform as well on a blindfold test. You know, is that Bill Evans or Art Tatum? I bet the South African kids would know that instantly.
Well, they did. I mean, now
you know,
things
or
have changed a bit.
you know, say you know, Freddie Hubbard or Miles Davis or you know, Coltrane or Rollins. They, you know, because that music was in their lives in a very vital way in the townships. It was a symbol of urbanization and modernity and
Black achievement.
Black achievement.
Yeah.
And many people could afford a record player. You know, they'd have very little else. And they'd share records. They'd form clubs that a jazz club, which meant that you brought your records and your friends brought theirs and played them. So that, you know, that was like a huge advantage that, of course, the powers that be wouldn't have been aware of, but it almost guaranteed success in a certain way. You know, as long as one removed the barriers, you had the passion for the music, and the music, it wouldn't have been as easy to turn all of those students into lawyers, for example. But to turn them into musicians was just to release the potential that was there.
When you when the program started moving, were you focused on ensemble playing, or was it something else? Or I'm sure there were different things, and you weren't the only teacher, correct?
Was.
Almost. I was the only formally qualified
Well, you were the
teacher,
only
but what we did.
You were the only full-time teacher, and then we had to find musicians to teach the students, and we had to find, and there was get classical musicians to also help teaching instruments. But Darius was for a long time the only teacher and the only full-time teacher. But I should I think I said early on that we signed this contract for 2 years, but in the end, we stayed nearly a quarter of a century. We kind of found it actually hard to leave because the people were so remarkable and the music was great. And in the book, back to the book again, we have, you know, chapters about just the happy and sad times and all the adventures. So it's a memoir as well as, you know, talking about jazz education.
Yes, right.
And one of the things that I did, and this is simply because I had to, you know, but then later on, I discovered this was an innovation, and I received praise for simply doing what seemed necessary, and that is bringing people from the community in as teachers.
Oh, yeah.
You know, go to a club, hear someone playing decent saxophone, okay, maybe it's only up to a certain level, but that's what you've got. That,
Yeah.
Talk to the guy that day, say, let's do a workshop. You'll get paid. And later on, that became conceptually something that was very much encouraged. But at the time, it was, it seemed sort of a strange thing to do. I don't know why. It would be pretty obvious that you would have musicians interact with the university, but that was kind of a new thing. And it was very validating for them. It encouraged the culture outside the university. It was a kind of legitimizing
Yeah.
that, because there were musicians who were, the opportunities weren't great, but some of them really, really played very well. I guess, well, one of the things, and Cathy had a big role in this, and, more from a management perspective, is that we were kind of professionalizing something that was there, something people were doing anyway, but a bit haphazardly.
Yeah.
And you talk about ensembles, focus on ensembles, yeah, because the way you get the most people involved is by doing that, and also that's the way you encourage peer-to-peer learning. If an experienced player is sitting next to an inexperienced player in the same section, he'll correct him. He'll say, you cut off the notes at the end of phrases, or, breathe here, and it's all on the fly. It's because you're trying to make the music sound right.
Yeah.
There's a fancy name for that now. It's called practice-based pedagogy.
Oh, I haven't heard that. Okay. Hey, Cathy, during that time, were you creating outside gigs?
Oh, absolutely. I spent a lot of time helping put bands actually together, and then finding gigs, fundraising for the expenses involved of traveling, and fundraising to keep the students there at the university. Some of this, by the way, is going to be in the documentary film, Playing the Changes, by the same name. We were extremely busy, as Darius said, improvising and inventing stuff all the time. And we took a big highlight, and it really changed our lives. It was in 1988, which is 5 years after we started the program. We took the first multiracial student group outside of South Africa to a big jazz conference in the United States in Detroit. It was then the National Association of Jazz Education. But it was such a special thing that the group we took, they had a name, the Jazzanians, and they were interviewed on CBS and NBC, and the USIS gave them a cultural tour around the whole states of America. It was like a major deal.
Yeah.
And of course, back home, back in South Africa, once the university saw all of that, and we got that, increased our support and people's interest, and it sort of really grew from that point. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's fantastic. Wow.
What's more, just what caps it though is we did a book tour in South Africa last month, and last month we had launches in Durban, Stellenbosch, which is near Cape Town, and it's known as a great site for a university and a big think tank called the Stellenbosch Institute for Advanced Study that sponsored a lot of our work, and in Johannesburg. And we were able to reassemble two of those bands, except for the members who've passed away in the interim. So we had the original Jazzanians was a larger group, but we made a Jazzanian quartet that played together at the book launch. All these people who were students are now like near retirement age. And a group called the New Jazz Connection, NU, for Natal University in Durban. And the gears meshed in such a remarkable way. We had everybody, including Mark Killian, who's quite a successful Hollywood composer, but he was on his way to India to work on a film, and he diverted his trip so he could be in Durban at that particular moment. And the Northern Iowa University Big Band, which is very good, as many of those Midwestern university bands are. The director of that band, the head of that program for many years, Chris Mertz, just happened to be on tour with his big band in South Africa on the very day that we needed to do this. So it felt like the karma was really right for that book launch.
Because the reason he was in the New Jazz Connection was he had done a couple of years teaching at Natal University, and the New Jazz Connection was the second band that we took overseas following the success of the Jazzanians. Yeah.
Wow. Gosh, there's so much wonderful stuff. So I want to remind and talk about it, remind our listeners that what's coming up here is the discussion about the book that Catherine and Darius have written called Playing the Changes. And it's released in South Africa, and it will be released in other areas like our area more on platforms in January of 2024. And also there's, I thought McKeel was going to be on with us, but I don't think I actually sent him a link because I don't really know his email address.
Well, I think he wrote and said he couldn't be on it, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah.
So McKeel 10 Kleij,
Yeah.
correct? And he is the filmmaker, director
Director. Yeah.
of the documentary, which is coming out in July, this July at a festival in Europe, correct?
Well, he hasn't chosen which one yet to launch it at. He's got a number of festivals that he's juggling at the moment, but it's probably more likely to start off in the. Well, actually, I don't know. He hasn't he hasn't got it firmed up yet, but it should be July that it'll start on the festival circuit. And of course, the hope is that some TV station will see it, like it, and buy it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, the film doesn't replicate the book. It has the film crew followed us to Poland and to South Africa, and it talks a lot about jazz playing a role in unjust societies, and it sort of gives an overview, I suppose, of what's in the book, but they're not, even though they have the same title, they're not exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure this question has been asked before in interviews, but I'm personally curious. So was there a point for you both where you realized, we're stepping on some broken glass here, and should we be should we continue on? And what, so I'm sure this question has been asked right before. Was there a point where you went, this is a little interesting, could be dangerous. It's certainly challenging, but yeah, I think we'll do it.
Well, part of the time we were there before 1994, when we had the first free election and when Nelson Mandela became president. But up until that point, South Africa was an extremely dangerous place. And we would often get letters from Dave and Iola Brubeck saying, you know, come home, you can do this, that, and the other thing. And so there were times when we thought, gosh, you know, it's pretty scary around here. But really the people were so special, I think, and the music too, that we just felt we couldn't leave it. Plus, at that point, there was still quite a lot to do to get the program really established. So it would have felt sort of half done to leave any sooner. We left finally in 2006, and that was even hard to do. But Darius at that point wanted to return to more full-time playing rather than teaching. And also it seemed right that now South Africans could take over the program. It didn't, because I mean, even though he was totally accepted and it was a success, there was always the question too, well, you know, is there some kind of cultural colonization or something? So it was good to have people taking over that were now able to and wanted to, and became a more, indigenous program.
Yeah, and a lot of, well, most of the most of the institutions that teach jazz in South Africa, those are my former students heading up those programs. So, it is so well established, but in the earlier part, we were, afraid after all the effort that we put in that it would just go away if we weren't there.
Yeah.
And, but after the establishment in 1989 of the Center for Jazz and Popular Music on campus, and seeing some other students out in the world doing well and starting their own programs, and all of that began to feel like, okay, it's really here. It doesn't take us personally to answer, to make sure we're there to answer the phone.
Which is great.
Yeah. But the dangerous times were really pre-1994, when just about any public gathering could be joyous, and then it could turn, just a crowd could react, the police could break up a concert,
because
there was no lack of spontaneous
combustion.
Yeah, right. Right.
I have a message from Daryl Winsman. I'm not sure if Darius recalls his teaching in South Africa being sponsored by Jamie Abersol, along with the program that I was teaching in Mexico City years ago while we were both in Miami for the IAJE convention. Jamie took us downtown in Miami and purchased boom boxes to take back to our respective programs and materials, play-alongs, and a box of books for the two programs to use.
That's a great story, and it's unforgettable what Jamie did. And
oh, absolutely, yeah.
Miami was 1992, and that's where the NU Jazz Connection appeared, and there was a big article about us in the LA Times by Leonard Feather. And Jamie's gift wasn't just a one-off. He continued to stock our library periodically, and it made a huge difference. So
And-
thanks for reminding us, Darren,
And
bringing
also,
that up.
we were really helped in the first number of years by many Americans. Peter Erskine sent a big drum set, and
Wow.
and other people sent instruments, and so we were really, really helped by American musicians, and that all came out of the
jazz ed movement.
the International Association of Jazz Education, and that organization doesn't exist anymore, but the replacement is JEN,
Yes.
Jazz
Education Network.
Network, right?
Yeah. I think now I'd like to play the trailer, if you don't mind, for the documentary.
Good idea. And you'll see the Jazzanians in that.
Oh, great. Okay. Here we go. Let's see. Playing the changes. There we are.
The best clue I can give you for the young man at the piano is that he looks exactly like his father, who also happens to be a pretty good pianist in the modern jazz field himself.
Oh, this is the trailer.
Was the expectation that as Dave Brubeck's son, I would just automatically be really good. Whatever I did should be at least above average. I had to kind of try to be better, even if I knew really I wasn't. So I guess I had some insecurities.
South Africa in the 80s was quite a dangerous place.
There was a lot of social upheaval, there was a lot of riots, a lot of protesting, etc. For stuff.
There was kind of a low-grade civil war going on.
There were places that were no go for us. And if you got stopped in a roadblock, for example, by police, they want to know where you're coming from and what you're doing.
What is the problem with us socially? Why was this such a difficult thing for people to mix and to integrate?
This idea of so-called separate development eventually began to affect music as well. There were sanctions in place, there were fines, so it was a high-stakes game.
Back then, you could not be in the same stage with a person of another color.
And that was the environment that Darius came into.
It's an unlikely hero, if you will.
You're talking about Dave Brubeck's son right now.
Right. He's doing some remarkable things in South Africa with some students.
What we were doing in the 80s and early 90s that was illegal is suddenly the model of what everyone should do.
People wanted so desperately to break out of an apartheid mold.
What Darius managed to do here was to set up what has become the finest jazz school on the entire continent.
You just couldn't contain this energy that was South Africa.
It was just a group of friends with great ideas just wanting to play music.
So in a way, it was nearly a quarter of a century of improvisation.
Oh boy, that looks fantastic. Oh, that's great.
The one of the students you see there, Nick Payton, your viewers may be interested to know, he's the grandson of Alan Payton, who wrote Cry the Beloved Country, and that book I know was a sort of standard school book in America for many years.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that part. I was somebody, my friend Dan Davila sent the allmusic.com credits for you, Darius, and of which there's 96. Sometimes they're not totally accurate, but sometimes they are. Looks like, did you play with Larry Coryell, record with him?
Yeah, 2 albums.
Okay. And also said, I guess you were guest playing on your dad's records too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were also ones where it was more than a guest thing. There was the new Brubeck Quartet. which was a quartet of Brubeck's. And
Well,
yeah,
with Dave and three sons.
yeah, Dave and three sons. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any other siblings?
Oh, yes. My goodness. We all right. We talked about the 2009 concert where I wasn't. That was with Chris on electric bass and trombone, and Dan on drums. And there's another brother, Matthew, who is a very fine cellist.
Oh.
And so, in various combinations. The one time we all appeared together simultaneously, I guess, it was the Kennedy Center Honors in 2009 when Dave received an award, and we were all on stage with the jazz ambassadors and John Faddis and that group. But anyway, yeah, I have siblings, and that Chris has a fantastic career going as a composer. He gets a lot of commissions. He does a lot of work with orchestras. And when he gets back from England, he'll be heading out to Reno for the Brubeck Jazz Summit, which is a summer school.
Right. Somebody mentioned that in here. Yeah, somebody, maybe it was Taylor, mentioned that.
Ragsty.
Yes, Chris and Dan are doing the Brubeck Summit Camp. Yep. So I will ask one question about your childhood, which I'm always interested. I'm kind of intrigued with how people kind of are drawn to playing and jazz, especially when their parents are working jazz musicians, and were you interested right from the beginning of playing piano, or did that take a little time?
Time, you didn't want to go there.
Yeah. I don't know, it's a difficult question. It was sort of always there. But I don't think I was like consciously trying to really work at it until I realized that was the only thing that had developed far enough that it was worth working on. I was interested in a lot of things. I played other instruments. I played trumpet and guitar, and my parents, well, particularly my mother, had an interesting take, I suppose, on who I was or education generally. When I was applying to different universities and I was accepted, and then talking about what I would study and where, and she said, and this is totally true, she says, well, you have your whole life to learn to play the piano or become a better musician. You only have these 4 years where you can study anything you're curious about. It was, I'd probably play a lot better today if I went to a conservatory and, and did that, but that wasn't me. That wasn't really my character. I think she somehow understood that. So, I studied ethnomusicology and history of religion, and I've always been interested in a lot of
medieval. Medieval intellectual history.
Well, a lot of kind of discursive things as well as playing. But I, like the documentary says, I like playing piano. This is something I do that gives, it gives a lot of satisfaction.
Yeah, I know what you mean about, you're born, for me too, my dad was a sax player, my mom had been a singer, my older twin sisters were singers, and one played piano. So I don't remember a time I didn't know about music or hear it or sing it or whatever. It was just part of it, and it always was, and always, up until now. By the way, Kendall K says hello.
Oh, hello.
He's a dear friend. He and his wife are dear friends of mine, and we play together a lot.
That's great. Where do you play?
Well, all over LA, and a little bit nationally and a little bit internationally. I've been to Japan a lot, although the pandemic obviously stopped that, but I think I'm going to start going back in the spring. I usually go at least once a year. So, yeah, can't stop me, man.
Right.
So, you are a composer, and you've probably composed hundreds and hundreds of songs. I'm imagining, because you've been involved in music for so long. Do you have recordings of your songs? Is that how you basically do it, and then perform them live?
Well, yeah, the main outlet of well, if you're an instrumentalist in the jazz world, if you want your music played, you play it yourself.
For singers too.
They'll maybe less so, but certainly. Well, all the Darius Brubeck Quartet recordings are predominantly my music, and some South African. It's a bit of a recipe or a menu that all of my records have one or two Dave Brubeck's, one or two South African things from that period when I was associated with so many really good musicians there. And yeah, the rest are mine.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about composition in terms of process and so forth, I really believe in, I don't know if it's a motto or a slogan, it comes from somewhere, is that good jazz compositions are ones that result in good jazz. So it isn't necessarily, the most detailed, complex arrangements that make good compositions, or the most learned or complicated things. And I'm not disparaging of that approach either, but I think I've always tried to write music that was easy enough for me to play, and let the performance be the site where it's developed, where all of the possibilities are realized eventually.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of that, we spoke about, and now I would love to hear something. You mentioned a record when we came on first.
Live in Poland is my most recent CD.
So I'm gonna, I guess, I'm assuming it's listed on, yes, Live in Poland, right? So we're gonna share the screen, and so this record, and what would you like me to play?
Well, what I hope will prove to be the hit, Earthrise, the opening track.
Great. All right. Well, here's Earthrise, the Darius Brubeck Quartet, which includes Dave O'Higgins, a great band, Dave O'Higgins, Matt Ridley, Wesley Gibbons. Dave is the sax player, right?
Right.
Yeah, and Matt is
the bass player with the long hair, and Wesley's carrying the cymbal bag.
Okay. I noticed in the live video that we had played before that Dave, like you, was wearing a blue jacket. I'm just saying. So anyway, that's just a little aside. So here we go for Earthrise. Beautiful song and
Thank
beautiful
you.
playing. Really beautiful. Sounds so good. So good. And this was recorded when?
In Poznan in 2018.
Okay.
That was a tour that was obviously it was 60 years after 1958. And that was the year of the Dave Brubeck Quartet's famous tour, which was the first time an American jazz group playing modern jazz went behind the Iron Curtain.
Oh, wow.
It was, you know, back in that era.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. That's so great. And that song, your song, I loved the song. It was really beautiful. When did you write that?
I wrote that in the early 70s.
Oh,
And I still enjoy playing it, but it was inspired by the photo that was taken by NASA of the Earth coming up over the lunar horizon, hence the title Earthrise.
that's great. I have a question. Gosh, sorry, Taylor, I haven't gone to your questions yet, but Roland, my friend Roland, he said your dad introduced me to odd time signatures when I was a fledgling jazz lover, probably like a lot of us, Roland. Do you consciously try to compose an odd time, or does it just happen naturally?
It's pretty natural for me. Well, first of all, because 1959 was that long ago. That's when Time Out was recorded.
Yeah.
But also, I spent quite a lot of time studying Indian music and classical music, and you know, I don't like really go into very tricky multimeter things, you know, like Bulgarian wedding songs or something, you know, where you get alternating bars of 11, 6, 13, 2, 4, and then something.
Right.
Just a regular odd time meter is for me, that, you know, that swings.
Yeah.
It's normal and natural, and it inspires a somewhat different kind of improvisation. It works better with a more modal approach, as you heard, rather than something that's full of chord changes. But it's also nice to have a harmonic structure.
Yeah.
You know, but anyway, the answer is yes. It's
Yeah.
well,
It's
for me.
great. It's great when something like 5 or 7 like just feels like normal. Yeah, because it's the music. The music's pulling it through. I'm sure a lot of us who heard Take Five were deeply affected by it. I mean, it was such a imprinted song in my brain, and um, yeah, I'm sure there were a lot of people. It was probably one of the most popular songs ever in jazz.
Yeah, and one of the most, I guess they're whatever it is, the performance or the song itself or the vamp, the beat, that's all of those things seem to reach a kind of perfection that made it quite universal.
Yeah.
And there's even a wonderful version that for well, it really came out quite a few years ago now, of a band in Pakistan, the Satchel Orchestra. Is that right, Kathy? Satchel did a version, and of course the lead instrument was a sitar, and classical Indian percussion, and they were just killing it. It was fantastic, really. And they on the back of that, they went on tour with a group of soloists from the Lincoln Center Jazz Orchestra. And we all met up in London, which was quite jolly. But it's like Take Five has kind of bridged every cultural divide imaginable. In South Africa, when I played it, it was a big dance number, which
That's
is,
interesting.
yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. My girlfriend is very much into Senegal and dancing, which is really a beautiful and different, unique dancing, dancing history. And yeah, it's really interesting to watch. Yeah, for me, I think, a few years after I heard Take Five, I heard, it might have been more than a few years, but it was Oregon. And that group brought in instruments and time signatures that I hadn't really experienced. That was really beautiful, like that.
Oh, sure, Colin Walcott.
Yeah.
I think he was the main driver of that. Though all of them, they were all such great musicians.
Yeah, yeah. I wanted to ask you about Paul Desmond, because I thought that he was a very prominent figure at that time too, that came forth. Incredible sound. Have any comments?
That isn't enough of a leading question.
Sorry. Well, yeah. I mean,
where are we going with this? To character, music?
yeah. Well,
relationship with Dave, relationship with me. I mean, what?
I guess maybe character. I would assume, because I think his music spoke for his character, which I really don't know, because I just thought about him and how beautiful his sound was, and how influential his playing was. And it was with your dad, I think, that really, his renownedness came forth.
Well, it's still such a recognizable personal sound.
Yeah. He wasn't that old, right? He was pretty young when
he died in 1977. I don't remember his birthday. But he and Dave were near contemporaries. I think Paul was maybe
a little younger.
Yeah, a couple of years younger, something like that.
Yeah.
And right, I think his sound is, for people who've heard it, is so much a part of the culture that it symbolizes a lot of things that have to do with the sort of person he was. It wouldn't be hard to guess that he was witty, considering all the quotes that he used to drop into music. Your audience knows what quotes are, right?
Yes, yes.
And his complete fluency on the instrument, it was so absolute that you didn't even think in terms of, this guy's got chops. You didn't even hear it as that. It was.
That's so true.
Just like witty conversation.
Yeah.
And he always created a mood which was very much like himself, which was, I wouldn't say withdrawn, but literally cool. Very cool guy. Fun to be around, but not at all noisy. He was a bachelor throughout his life, but dated many women, some of them quite famous in the day. He had a big crush on Audrey Hepburn, but because he had to some degree, a fear of rejection, he never came forward with that. But he might have been successful. I mean, he was. I don't mean this at all in a vulgar sense, but if you try to get back to the culture of the early 60s, late 50s, he would have been like the man Playboy readers would want to be. Well-dressed, Manhattan apartment, cocktail shaker on the bar, circle of witty friends like Woody Allen go to hang out. He was a member of a chess club and ranked pretty high. And and he was always nice, and and I think all of that comes through in his opus, not only his work with Dave,
yes,
but certainly in that.
yes. Thank you for speaking on that. So for both of you, do you? I mean, your relationship to education is so deep. How do you see musical education now and moving forward? Do you see do you see it changed or changing and bettering or needing something?
It's certainly changing because the whole music world has changed and there's so many more kind of music genres, and young people are not, and I mean, jazz is no longer popular music in the strictest sense, and so I think teaching jazz is more difficult because the students don't come in with any deep knowledge of a jazz tradition and might not even know who Louis Armstrong is, or so that's more difficult to kind of sort of move backwards and from all the genres of today and say, well, actually you can see some of the roots come from jazz. I believe that teaching jazz in America is still very, very strong, judging by, the number of teachers and students that go to these major conferences. So that's still going strong. I don't know if you want to add to that.
I think it's something I want to write about someday, and I haven't really formed all my conclusions. As Cathy said, it's harder in one sense because jazz's place in the culture has decisively shifted to that marginal but at the same time prestigious space as classical music. It's respected, and some people will aspire to be jazz musicians, but most people won't. It's simple as that. On the other hand, the educational tools are amazing. It's just amazing what, thanks to the internet and to music software, the way students were learning while I was teaching is relatively primitive, putting on an LP with Jamie Aebersold counting in a section. Now you can have an app that will play Gal from Ipanema or Giant Steps in every key at whatever tempo you nominate So, you know, you have all this technical support and your ability, you know, and instead of having to go all over town finding a library that might have Lenny Tristano Descent into the Maelstrom, you just say that to your computer and Spotify will bring it up. So the opportunity and you know, the breadth and depth of learning that's possible for students has never been greater, and that's wonderful.
And I think in studying jazz, you can't go wrong. That's going to help you with whatever choice you ultimately go for.
Mhm.
You know, whether it's hip hop, rap, or even all the even music's beyond. I don't even know all the names,
Yeah.
but learning jazz will help you in all those areas.
Yeah, it refers, they all refer back to jazz because it is African American music. It's and the reason jazz is so successful globally is that it's always been a hybrid music.
Hmm.
And that means that instead of just being fully imported, I mean, you know, like if you listen, well, you mentioned Japan. I mean, great classical artists in Japan, you know, great exponents of a European tradition, but a European tradition is always what it was and will continue to be. Whereas you go to somewhere like Cuba or South Africa or Brazil,
Yeah.
jazz becomes local.
Uh-huh. Right.
Because of that hybridization process.
Right.
Uh-huh.
But
There is, yeah.
but it's a little different from the question that you're asking. I think you're asking about in an institutional setting.
Yeah.
What and I don't know. I think my generation is the last generation for whom jazz was really a contemporary phenomenon. It was part of our culture in the same way that Bob Dylan was part of our culture. But the effects of that can be quite unpredictable. I'll give you a weird and completely true example is all that said about jazz in South Africa. Okay, so as transformation happened and every institution was encouraged to bring, you know, more Africans in, and that everything had to go kind of in the direction that we had pioneered. We had sort of, you know, broken through in a lot of areas, but eventually the one area of study that's in terms of student enrollment now, I'm just counting student numbers, that surpassed the jazz course in Durban, South Africa, in KwaZulu-Natal, with a predominantly, as in sort of 85% Black population, was opera. More students came to do opera.
Wow.
And, you know, you can say, go figure. And I make this point, I'm not drawing other conclusions from it. I'm just making this point to say there's a delightful unpredictability about what the future will bring, you know, when you try to set up institutions and try to cater for what people want, but at the same time preserve what's culturally valuable. It deserves to be thought about a lot, but I don't think it's any good second guessing on the basis of expectations you might have about demographics, however you define them, because people will surprise you.
Yes.
You know, besides jazz, not by a great number, the biggest enrollment of music majors in our university, anyway, in South Africa, but it's pretty prevalent, are students who love opera. And that means that most of them have never heard Italian. Bad enough that they have to go from Afrikaans or Zulu to English, and then they have to sing these languages.
Well, there's a very
But they love
strong vocal tradition.
Yeah, that's why. That's why there are a lot of great
partly
voices.
it's sort of like you think of Wales and you think of all the choirs, the same in KwaZulu-Natal.
Kathy, Americans are going to have fish, mammals that swim in mind when you think about Wales.
Oh.
I don't think so. I think people
well, I mean WALES, right. Not Paul Winter.
Paul Winter's a company. Although Donald Trump, before Charles was king, had sat next to Charles at a royal reception and tweeted that he had a great time with the Prince of Wales.
WALES.
Oh, wow. And there you go. Taylor's asking if you have, both of you, top 3 favorite records of any genre that influenced you. I hate only picking 3, but
Well, I think I'd have to say Bob Dylan's in there for me.
No, but that's an artist.
Oh, just jazz.
Just a record.
No, but record or genre, in any genre. But you can pick artists. Why not? We don't have to follow the rules. So Bob Dylan.
Well, I would say Bob Dylan, Duke Ellington, and I was at university and realize how old I am, in the 50s, and so Dave Brubeck was a very big hit in South Africa, and the album that really I loved was Jazz at Oberlin. And has great numbers on like Perdido and what is it? I'm trying to think.
The Way You Look Tonight.
The Way You Look Tonight, right. So I love that album. So that's an album. I pretty much like everything Bob Dylan does, but that's great from jazz. And the same with Duke Ellington. I would have to say Duke Ellington's Unknown Sessions, where he plays with a sextet. Just beautiful, beautiful music. Yeah.
I recently recorded Lotus Blossom, which Duke apparently, at the end of many sessions, either recording sessions or playing, he would sit down and play. It was Strayhorn's song, but he just was fascinated by it. Do you know that song, Lotus Blossom?
It's sort of a trill, Dottie?
No, and I think there's another name for it. Ba da 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 da. It's a very beautiful song.
So I've given I'm sure I've left out something very. What was the question? Favorite or significant or what?
It was favorite.
Sort of favorite, yeah. Okay, you haven't said.
I know, I can't do it.
It's hard, isn't it? It's really hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. And then also, I think one's looking for different things at different times in life. And also, like, does favorite mean that's influenced my approach to music the most, or does it mean
your life?
What I'd like to sound like, or just what I like to listen to in my dorm room when I was 19.
You don't have to be so complicated. You can just say, and I've remembered another one. I'd say Paul Robeson was very influential in my life, both musically, politically, and just such an amazing person that could do so many things, from playing top class sport to his wonderful singing to trying to change the world. And yeah, and I was only very little when I first heard Paul Robeson, but my father could sing very well, and he sort of played Ellington and Paul Robeson. So they influenced me. It also influenced me in terms of thinking, well, you know, any person of any race can be great.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. I think Darius is at a loss because he has too many possibilities.
I've got so many possibilities. All right. If okay, I could throw out some things that not in terms of ranking them, but just what's been on my mind a little bit lately is Paul Simon's Still Crazy.
Paul Simon, yeah.
And that mainly because I don't know, maybe it was a conversation I had recently. I don't know, something triggered reminiscing about Michael Brecker, and just, you know, the level of proficiency and complexity and everything that he attained, and yet he could nail a short break in a pop song in a way that was just so memorable.
Yeah.
You know, or, you know, like, although it's Billy Joel isn't like a real favorite of mine the way Paul Simon is, but, you know, like Phil Wood's break in Just the Way You Are. So
yeah,
times when jazz skill, jazz sense, jazz musicianship and proficiency breaks through.
Yeah.
And you know, manifests in this other way, and that's exciting.
And you like all the Detroit soul stuff.
Oh yeah. When at our grandson's wedding, the background music was, you know, a lot of it was Motown.
Yeah.
And I don't need to hear any of those tracks again, because I've got them absolutely note for note in my mind. You know, if I want to hear Chain of Fools, I just think Chain of Fools. You know, got every lick, every inflection. But music had a different role in our lives in the than it does now.
It did, definitely.
But for you know, contemporary stuff, you know, I just hear so much that's amazing. I guess to give a contrasting new sound, new-ish, or, you know, more contemporary sound that I like a lot without naming a specific album or piece. I think Maria Schneider's work is wonderful. It's it's got its own kind of American idiom, and it's very contrasting with stuff that's, you know, groove based or funky or even swing based. It's, you know, she just does something else with orchestration and ideas and development. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Do you get much time to listen to music these days?
Hardly ever.
Yeah.
Well, we listen to music every morning. Do you mean hardly ever? Well, we listen to BBC Radio 3 every morning.
Okay.
For at least an hour. So, but that's mainly classical music, but that counts.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, I remember it well.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was just talking about that yesterday with somebody, you know, I forget why, but I was just saying it's, you know, I mean, not, well, yeah, I guess I could say in the old days, I would lie on the ground and put on a whole CD or record. And I would, you know, sometimes in the dark, and I would just listen, you know, and I mean, I have not done that in a number of years. Even, you know, when the CD player was a little more prominent, I'd have a 6 CD player in my kitchen. And for 2 weeks, I would listen to these 6 CDs. And it was great, got really soaked in. And now I do listen, but I listen differently. And also I'm singing more and working on my own thing. So I don't listen as much.
Yeah, if I had time to listen, I keep thinking, well, I should be practicing.
Right. Hey, I do have a musical question. What do you, I mean, this is obvious, but I'm going to ask it just for you to answer. What do you look for uh, in order to have high regard for music that's being created?
The I don't have a technical answer for that.
Well, you don't have to be technical.
Well, I should say I don't have a scientific or objective answer for that. It's just like when I hear sincerity, that really does it for me. And I guess sincerity is you could retroactively say, well, it has something to do with feel, which is, just where the articulations are in relation to the pulse, and it has to do with timbre and, inflection and naturalness. Maybe all of those things go into it, but that, if I feel that coming through, then I'm listening.
Yeah. I mean, sincerity is probably a leading point because, I mean, I'm in love with Sting and his singing and his writing. And he's not, his songs are not technically advanced, quote unquote, but that's not what I love about it. I love the feeling, the music, the emotion, things like that.
Yeah, and his Winter album,
It's
I think
lovely, yeah.
that's a beautiful album, and it has a kind of narrative structure to it, and it's really somewhat about his own life, so yeah, I'm with you with as far as Sting goes. I don't claim to know his whole opus or anything,
Me
but
too.
I've heard great things.
My friend Dan did bring me to see his show, The Last Ship, which was wonderful. I don't know if you've seen it, but if you ever get a chance, it's just a great show. It's great writing, both musically and for the play itself. He was in it, but he wasn't hogging the stardom. And it was a story about the area where he grew up, and political, social.
Newcastle and
The
yeah,
Northeast, a
the
very
Northeast.
deprived
Yeah,
part of.
right.
Yeah, it was really.
That was,
enjoyed it a lot.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think I saw a little bit of that.
Well, I feel like I could hang out with you like all day and night. And
Oh,
I'd like to have a glass of wine and just sit
yeah.
around on the couch and hang out. You're both so, and I'm not surprised, but I'm just very happy to meet you and to feel your realness and just your high level of humanness. Thank you so much.
Oh, well,
Well,
thank you.
thank you for having us on, and thank you for plugging the book, which will come out on Amazon towards the end of the year.
And the movie, it's just
and-
like Gone with the Wind.
It-
Read the book, watch the movie.
Yeah,
Well,
so once
I hope it's not Gone with the Wind.
no, I'm sure it won't be.
Right,
Just to
right.
remind people, the documentary will be out sometime in July, playing
Yeah.
the changes. The South African version of the book is out now, but for all other kind of platforms, including here in the US, it'll be out in early 24.
Yeah, maybe a little before that, but
Oh, okay.
definitely by then. Yeah.
Yeah.
and it's being published by the international edition is being published by the University of Illinois Press.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, right. You mentioned that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so very much. You
You.
know, I look forward to staying connected and watching you guys and listening to new concerts and various things like that. It's been a real pleasure and honor. Thank you.
Well, it's been our pleasure too, and I'm going to look up your music now.
Okay.
And I hope we answered the people's questions adequately, and especially Taylor's. But
Yeah.
Taylor had a lot more questions, but I have to, if I read his questions, it leads me down Taylor's viewpoint. So I like to have my viewpoint and then pepper it with Taylor. But he's a very deep thinker. He's a wonderful, wonderful person and a great guitar player too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks and have a great evening.
Thank you. I'm preparing for it by doing some chicken on the side.
Oh,
so
that's
that
what you're
I
doing.
can put it some leftover chicken to make some chickens.
Oh, see, another reason why I wish I was there.
Okay. All right.
Okay, you guys.
Bye-bye, Cathy. Thank you
Thank
again.
you so much.
Bye.
Bye.